Some people will say that I am starting to run out of ideas for these. Some people, being me in this case, that I was saying that. And I am a little bit running out of ideas, but not quite yet. But the funny thing is, usually when people say, "Oh, they run out of ideas," what they really mean is, I don't like their ideas. I am an avid fan of the show Supernatural. The damn thing ran for 15 seasons. Around season 7 or 8, people were really going, like, oh, they ran out of ideas. They had plenty of ideas. They just weren't the best ideas. People just didn't like them. I didn't like them a whole lot. But there were ideas. And when people say that, you are usually getting a little outside of the box, a little more creative, for better or for worse. And this class might be one of those. One of the classes that have to get a little more original. Because today's class is the Inscriber. If you never heard of the Inscriber, I don't blame you. That does also mean you didn't watch my WoW RPG videos, and I do blame you for that. You really should. But if you do not know what the Inscriber is, I will give you, as usual, a quick rundown. So the World of Warcraft TTRPG was an official product that consulted with Blizzard and implemented lore things that were either secret until that point or were meant to be introduced to the setting later. It did have a number of its own goofs, like claiming Thrall killed Grom to save him from Manoroth's corruption, but overall we were told that Blizzard was either vetting the ideas of the RPG people, or the RPG people were asking Blizzard to tell them about things players didn't know about yet. And I don't know from which direction this class came, but presumably someone at Blizzard at least vetted this class as a possibility, or even came up with it in the first place. It technically is not canon, like most RPG stuff isn't, but a lot of the RPG stuff became implemented into the proper lore later. So I argue it is a possibility to see it in the future. The Inscriber is the lesser known brother of the Rune Master. See, Blizzard used to be huge into runic magic, which is a part of why I think it was legit Blizzard idea, and they had a bunch of rune-based concepts. A few fans know about the Rune Master, the original quote-unquote Warcraft monk, inscribing themselves with runes in order to be able to punch people, wearing little weapons or armor, and still being competitive with others. Far fewer fans know about the Inscriber. What was a little weird about the WoW RPG was how Mage and Warlock and Necromancer were technically not classes. They were paths of the Arcanist class, a little like 5th edition D&D subclasses. And besides these 4 well-known and famous classes or slash paths, the RPG also introduced a 4th path, the Inscriber. What was different about the Inscriber was that it was doing most of its magic only through runes. Inscribers could replicate a lot of Arcanist spells, shared between other paths, but they also had their own whole unique feature in the form of runes. Because there were runes, it meant you needed to draw them on people, and drawing them would take whole minutes. So what it meant was that during camping or resting, the Inscriber would have to go around and paint shapes on their friends, and the whole group would go out drawn up like they had a sleepover at a fraternity and someone was feeling up to pranks. What it also meant was that they couldn't really paint their runes on their enemies, because, if you run up to a gnoll and start drawing shapes on her face, she's gonna slap you away, and then probably shoot you. The solution to being able to do any offensive spells at all was painting the runes on little wooden blocks, and then running up to the enemies and slapping them in the face with that wooden block. Running up to people as a pure caster. Needless to say, the class was largely relegated to support, and was a little bit silly, and that's why, much like how the Rune Master is called the original Warcraft monk, I call the Inscriber the original Warcraft Bard. So, yes, this class is a little bit silly, and it is extremely obscure. But if you know Warcraft, you know silliness never stopped anyone, and it is still steeped in that old, classic Blizzard lore. And that's why I think it can still work as a future playable WoW class, after a little bit of redesign. So how does the WoW Inscriber work in theory? The basics are: it's a cloth intellect caster with a heavy focus on support through various means, but not limited to it. The Inscriber can wield most classic caster weapons, so largely staves, wands, and offhands, but they can probably also equip daggers and one-handed maces and so on. Their resource, I imagine, would work very similar to a Death Knight. They'd get runic power and runes. Spending the runes on different and more offensive abilities generates runic power, and runic power is used on the more supportive abilities and can regenerate some runes. Much like a Death Knight, it creates this very subtle dance between the two resources. We do also have to address the elec in the room and talk about the whole, running up to people to slap them in the face with a little wooden block. In the actual World of Warcraft, we have seen runic magic, and usually the casters can just draw the rune in the air and blast their energy into it. So that is what we're changing from the RPG. The Inscriber gets a magical stylus, and they can use it to generate an invisible vertical platform in the air and draw on that platform, and it doesn't take 10 minutes. Then they impart their magic into the sign they draw through the stylus and blast the spell out. Does it take away a little bit from the Inscriber's uniqueness? Perhaps, but also it makes it a little more practical in the video game. The main feature of the Inscriber that sets it apart from, say, Mage is the actual runes. Not just a resource, you can cast individual runes or marks on your allies or yourself, which have various triggering conditions, and you can inscribe, for example, a mark of the Badger. Next time that target is hit, they gain Bloodlust, getting a lot of haste. Another target can be inscribed at the same time with a mark of Awareness, and the next time they are targeted with an AoE spell, they briefly gain Speed and Avoidance. The Inscriber can also manually trigger the runes they planted on people to give them the effects when they want them. Now, like most classes, the Inscriber has 3 specializations. They focus on, respectively, healing and support, a more offensive support, and a summoner. The first 2 specializations I named after the types of different runes the Inscriber could do in the RPG. The first one I called the Mark Inscriber, because those were the runes you would put on a creature, usually your allies. The Mark Inscriber focuses on healing and support. They gain more options for marks, and more mark slots per person, or they can trigger them manually more frequently. Yeah, maybe I do a lot of support specs, because we don't have a lot of them in the MMO, but I do think that by mixing them with more direct healing, it creates a more well-rounded specialization. The second specialization is what I call the Sigil Inscriber. Sigils were another type of rune in the RPG that you would usually plant on an area. While the Sigil Inscriber isn't limited to AoE, they get bonuses to those sigils. The other inscribers would usually take some time to set those sigils up, and the Sigil Inscriber gets to be more versatile and quick with those area spells, turning far more offensive. And because it is still the Inscriber, a lot of those sigils are less about direct damage and more about hampering the enemies in some way, such as snares or silence, or a physical barrier that prevents them from moving in. The third type of runes you could use in the RPG was called glyphs. And we already have glyphs in WoW, and they're doing something different. And I think even Blizzard forgot about the glyphs, so we're not doing that for the third spec. Instead, we're doing something I was torn about, being a hero talent or a base specialization, because it has a very unique style. Nevertheless, I think it's not quite at the hero talent levels, so my third Inscriber specialization is the Dark Inscriber. The Dark Inscriber was introduced later as a class variant, and it allowed the Inscriber access to more Warlock and Necromancer spells, making them more offensive. And one of the things unique to the Dark Inscriber that was described very explicitly was painting runes on bodies to animate them as your undead minions. So the Dark Inscriber gets to summon a variety of runed creatures, be they rune golems, or those rune inscribed undead things from the more, if I check the Warcraft wiki later and check what they were called, I will put that name and the picture in the projector screen. Or perhaps bound elementals with those rune inscribed bracelets they wear. The Dark Inscriber gets more offensive spells, more summons, and focuses less on buffs and debuffs, and becomes more self-sufficient. Now the next step for any class is the hero talents. Because the Inscriber was exclusive to the RPG, we don't have a lot of hero units or even, WoW, mobs to work them into their own hero talents. We do, however, have some RPG prestige classes, and we can just fit other lore into niches that fit the Inscriber. In ways, a lot of the actual WoW hero talents were just made up whole cloth. The first one, available to Mark and Sigil Inscribers, is the Ley Walker. The Ley Walker was a prestige class in the RPG, and they would get to essentially use the ley lines they attuned to in order to power up their abilities in a way similar to meta magic from D&D. So in WoW, the Ley Walker gets to activate an ability which highlights, for their whole party, the ley lines in the area. And I can see this either being a lot of work for someone at Blizzard to just have to paint the ley lines everywhere in the whole game, or maybe it could just use the actual nav mesh, the paths NPCs use to move around, if possible. Either way, the Ley Walker and their party can step on the highlighted ley lines and use them either as a resource, like using them like mana, or to enhance their abilities in other ways. The Ley Walker can interact with those ley lines and empower them or prevent them from depleting too soon. While I can see some people complaining, oh, you didn't play mage when they had to stand in the arcade room to be competitive. But I did! That was one of the few times I was actually playing mage. And yes, it was annoying. But the ley lines are lines. You get a lot of ground for movement on them, and everyone in your party can use them. That's why I think it would be different from the old arcane rune, and giving you a lot more versatility with it. Sigil and Dark Inscriber gain access to the Arcane Ascendant. The Arcane Ascendant is not based on any particular unit or prestige class, but it's the general concept of the Inscriber becoming so attuned to the lines and patterns of the universe that they can transmute themselves into pure arcane energy, becoming like a mini constellar. They gain a button to shapeshift into a celestial form, and once in that form, they radiate power and energy around them. Wherever they move, they carry either buffs or just resource mana restoration, as people can draw on their allies and Inscribers a limitless font of power. Finally, Dark and Mark, that's funny to say, Dark and Mark Inscribers get access to the Soul Guide hero talent. Inspired by the River of Souls from the Shadowlands, not everything from Shadowlands was bad, okay? The Soul Guide serves as a sort of psychopomp. Psychopomp. I don't know how well that articulates. You know, soul guides like the Grim Reaper, Thanatos, Hermes, the Kyrians. Psychopomp. The signature ability would impact how dead players play. A player marked by a soul guide will either be able to resurrect on the spot, or their spirit releases much closer to the body, and retains a certain amount of ability, being able to perform some abilities while dead, until they have to properly release or get back to their body after a short time. This ability would probably be very niche, but allow for some very unique play styles, and probably break a few things at first, but all the best classes always have to break something when they get introduced. The last major question here is the races for the Inscriber. While the RPG tells us the Inscriber is more common among the Alliance, especially humans and gnomes, it also gives us this fellow as the iconic Inscriber. And there are very few things in the lore that would really forbid most races from becoming Inscribers. And these days, most classes can be played by almost all races, so I am saying there is no reason why they wouldn't give Inscribers to pretty much everyone. So that was a lot of work, basing it on very little source material. I do like the challenge though, to come up with something workable and unique. It is probably treading close to the territory of almost completely made up classes, loosely fitting into the established lore, but I promise you that unless you want me to start doing the completely made up classes like Blackguards or Void Reavers, this is probably as far as I am going to go on the channel. Meanwhile, this should be it for the video. There are still a couple of other potential classes, not all of which were on the poll yet, so there is still going to be more options, more videos for this, either way. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you would have done this class differently, or you think it shouldn't be a class at all, and do let me know in the comments below, or maybe you just never heard about the Inscriber before this video at all, and now you heard this video and now you're a massive fan and you absolutely want to see the Inscriber to be added next. Runic magic fits the Titans. It could be added in the last Titan. They could do it. If you want to see that, let me know in the comments below. And if you do want to see more of this sort of stuff, or my now regular StarCraft 2 streams, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm done doing the YouTube shilling stuff, so I hope to see you next time.